Over the last couple of months, what we've gotten to see on the India-China relationship has been somewhat extraordinary. After 4 to 5 years of tensions, you're seeing India and China broadly trying to normalize the relationship. Interactions between the two countries have become increasingly normal, increasingly stable. And the big question is whether that will now apply to the India-China economic relationship as well. China has been pushing for increased investments into India's economy. India, though, has been restricting China's investments. It continues to suspect China's economic influence in India and is not willing to allow more Chinese investment into the country. But there are increasingly calls for India to allow more of that Chinese investment, including from some people within the government of India, because the sense is that if India wants to become a truly powerful manufacturing superpower, it needs China's help. So to decode this question of India-China economic relations is Mao Keji, who's joining us here on India Today Global. Mao Keji is a PhD student at Tsinghua University, but he's also one of China's best known voices on the India-China relationship. In fact, he curates a newsletter that has over 1 million followers across Chinese social media talking just about this question of India and China, and particularly on economic issues. So, Mr. Mao, thank you so much for joining us. Let me ask you a very important question that's on the minds of a lot of Indians. We know that China is pushing for greater investment, particularly in India's manufacturing sector, including, for example, for the manufacturing of cars. BYD, which is a very, very prominent electric vehicles company in China, wants to invest in India. There are several examples like it. But India has been restricting Chinese investments into India ever since 2020, since the COVID-19 pandemic. And over 5 years, that situation has not improved. Now, you have been a critic of this Indian policy and you've actually called for more India-China cooperation here. So break it down for us. Tell us, what exactly do you believe about the India-China economic relationship? What would you like to see change?
Well, first of all, I want to say one thing. So, the manufacturing versus service industry, service sector, which one you should opt for the future development? The answer is not always 100% sure, right? In India, you still find two schools, they fight with each other fiercely. Some people saying that India should do service. Some people say India should do the manufacturing. You don't get a 100% guaranteed answer for that.
Right.
And when Modi government, they paused the PLI 1.0. A lot of people celebrated that on the internet. They laugh at that, right? So the thing is, my very first argument I would like to make is for large economy like China and India, manufacturing is the only way out. You just cannot do service industry to push yourself into a developed economy. That's impossible. But a lot of Indian people, for example, Rajan, the former governor of the Reserve Bank, he's a big fan of service industry. And there are a lot of Indian very famous people, economists, they are all fan of that. So, as long as you have those people there, it's really hard just to reach a consensus that we should do that single-mindedly, right? So whenever you encounter some difficulties, you just think about, okay, I should not do that. I will just retrieve back to service because that is the comfort zone for India, right? So that was the first argument I wanted to make. But in China, if you look at China, if you look at Japan, South Korea, and the province of Taiwan, you find that, okay, everyone agreed that manufacturing, industrialization is the only way out. Everybody agrees. No one disagrees. Right? So I think that's the first thing. I'm a huge admirer for Modi ji. Why? Just because he is so determined in pushing the manufacturing sector. So you have Make in India initiative, right? You have PLI and you have a lot of other things. Some name you are not even familiar with, but it's still there. It's like a PMP things, like phased manufacturing program, things like that. We've studied that closely. I think it's on the right track.
Right.
The thing is, sometimes you find frustrated because even if your strategy is correct, but implementation can be a problem, even if your strategy is correct. Even if you have the best strategy at the world, but you don't know how to implement that, at the end of the day, you achieve nothing.
Right.
So
Could you say a little bit? Could you say a little bit about what the barriers you think are to that implementation? What do you think is going
okay,
right?
I have like 100 examples for that.
Okay.
I can give
Give
you
me
one
two.
big
Give me two.
example.
Give me two. Give me two. Right.
Okay, so if you look at the POI and the PN3, those two things impact the Chinese investment most heavily in past 5 years, right? POI and the PN3. You find those two things, both of them are regarded as some very important key policies of Modi government, but they are essentially conflict to each other, right? So, for example, if you want to have POI, that means you want to increase the scale of production, right? Because POI rewards a company which can produce the largest scale of production. But at the same time, you have PN3. PN3 just stops, countries neighboring India from coming. And, there will be very little investment from Nepal or Pakistan or Bangladesh. That policy is actually the China policy, PN3. So, the Chinese economy is the largest manufacturing economy in the world. And China is also the largest export economy in the world. And if you want to increase the scale of production in India and you stop Chinese people coming, what do you think? It's like conflict. It's like self-defeating thing.
Self-harm.
I mean, if you look at it closely enough, you will find there are a lot of problems like that. You do one thing and you do other thing, but those two things, they conflict. Then they canceled out. After some years, you have nothing.
All right, Mr. Mao, I take your point. You've emphasized that India needs strong manufacturing to grow and that China can, in fact, help India with manufacturing. That much can be accepted by a lot of people. But there are reports that are coming out in very respected publications talking about how China is actually restricting the export of technology and talent to India to prevent India, really kneecapping India from developing the kind of manufacturing power that China has. In fact, there was a report that as Apple is switching more of its production to India, China's government has actually taken an active role in restricting exports of technology and talent. So you're making a point about Chinese investment, but then the sense is that China's government is not really happy about India becoming that kind of manufacturing superpower that China has become. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
That is the single largest mess we've seen on the horizon. I mean, you just look at the policy. PN3 has been there for 5 years. It was there, in 2020, even before the Galawan incident, right? So the PN3 has been there for 5 years. And the visa restriction also started with COVID-19. People like me, I'm a very pro-India scholar in China. People like me could hardly get an Indian conference visa or tourist visa. That's not a secret if you look at the data. And it's very, very uneven. It's like the Chinese embassy, they issues hundreds of thousands of visas to Indian people. But the Indian embassy, on the other hand, only issues a couple thousand of them. If you look at that is so uneven. And just given the regime like that, I don't think, the argument that the Chinese side stopped the flowing of personal or capital, it's not. I don't think that's very persuasive argument. Because if you want Chinese investment and personnel, you should get rid of those regulation on your side. If you have those regulations on your side, how can you accuse China to stop them? I mean, I don't know what's going on there because I'm in the US. I don't have the credential to have access to all the information back in China.
Right.
But my guess is that can be a tactic used by some companies to have extra leverage over Indian government.
All right, Mr. Mao, we'll have to agree to disagree there because the reports that have come out have pretty clearly stated that China's government itself is participating in these restrictive exports on technology. We also know very clearly that China's government actually does not want to lose manufacturing to foreign countries. It really doesn't seem that unreasonable to say that China's government could be behind these efforts.
The thing is, you look at a timeline. So now the regulations for Indian side, in the name of national economic security, they has been there for many years. But the concern for the Chinese side is, the restriction is something new, right? That's the thing we can agree with. So if you have so many regulations and you have a lot of tax rate against not only Chinese companies but also other foreign companies, you have all those negative things already there. I mean, you should expect people from other countries also use some tactic to have extra leverage on you.
Fair enough. So you're saying that this is some sort of leverage, a bit of a battle between India and China as well.
Yeah, so that would be a card to play. I have some cards. If you don't treat me very well, I will just use some excuse to stop my coming.
Interesting. I understand. So you're saying that this could also be a tool of leverage between the two countries. I understand that. Could I also ask you then a sense of, you have pushed a lot for, I'm going to ask you two final questions and then I'm going to let you go because I know it's late there. Could you tell me two things? Right? One on...
Can I clarify something?
Oh, yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's a leverage used by the companies. I don't think Chinese government has been playing any kind of rule there. To be very honest, as far as I know, because we don't really worry about the rise of India as a manufacturing competitor. We know, it might be one day a threat, but it's really distant. I mean, we've been through that for many years. We've been in that position for many years. We know that, if India want to rise as a manufacturing power, China can never stop it because you are such a large country, right? If you cannot stop its rise, why don't you just make some money out of it?
Right, Mr. Mao, so you're saying that this is actually, it could be a battle of leverage, a game of cards between governments and also between companies trying to extract more out of each other. Fair enough. You have also in the past pushed for economic reforms within India that would attract more foreign investment, that would make India's economy run better. You've tracked this issue extremely closely. Could you tell me about 3 reforms that you would like to see in the Indian economy?
Yeah, I think we have very similar answer. I know your answer and I know my answer. 3 things, right? The first thing, labor regulation. I think they've combined all the labor regulations into 4 laws, 4 big ones. But the thing is, the laws are already there, but how to implement the law is still a big issue. Because we all know that labor regulation is concurrent, listed in the constitution. So it not only requires the central government, also requires the provincial government to do things. And it get very dirty at a local level. It's not you just change the law and everything will be fine. It's not like that. There are like numerous invested interest groups out there. You have to deal with them. And they are deep into local politics. Very, very messy, very, very dirty. You don't know how to do that. I mean, you should have a huge reform in that sector. But the thing is how to implement. That's even more important than the change of the law. I've been following that very closely, but I don't find any major inroads into that.
Understood. Right.
And I always feel very frustrated, because India is such a large country, a lot of people, and a lot of people, if they are outside of the formal sector, if they are in informal sector, no one cares about their wage, their working condition, right? But how come if you get into the factory, everything will be looked after? It's just not make sense for me. I mean, in China, it's flat. So I think that's the first thing I can think of. The second thing is even harder to deal with is the land acquisition. Because it always linked to the property rights. And in countries like India, people always hold up to their property rights. So, it's not very easy to kind of get enough land for development, especially if you want to build a huge network of infrastructure. That will be a problem. And but I've seen some major inroads in that aspect.
Right.
I think that's a less issue now than before, and I think it will get better and better in the future. Yeah. The third thing is actually the tax. The tax thing. I mean, I'm very frustrated with the tax bureaucrats in India. So if you want to go after someone, you always find something in the regime of tax. No, we if you read the Indian newspaper, whenever Indian government wants goes after someone like a journalist, like an editor, like a private company, like a political competitor, you always go for tax stuff. That means tax has been used as a tool or weapon against people you don't like. I mean, yeah, you can do that, but the cost is, the whole environment will be terrible. People will get scared. So I mean, look at those years. There has been like a tax rate against the foreign companies.
Right.
I have a theory for that. So for the Indian tax bureaucrats, it's really hard for them to collect tax with small business in India. Because all those small business, they're too small to be effectively taxed. So you have to go to them one by one to collect a small amount of tax. So for them, it's really costly to do that. But the local big business, the business house, family business, those big companies, they're so politically connected. They're very powerful. Either connected to the provincial level politics, or they link to BGP at the center. So it's really hard, politically impossible to tax them effectively because they are part of it. So, if you cannot tax the local little business and you cannot tax large business, you can only go to foreigners. Foreigners, they are big enough to be the cash cow, and they are not politically protected as a local big company.
Right.
So they are easy targets, always ready for cash. And the thing is, you do something to foreign companies is politically popular at the local level and at central level. Because the history of India being colonized for so many years.
Right.
Everybody, harbors a little bit of the hatred towards foreigners. So you can turn that into a play for nationalism. Very easy. You don't even need to pretend. Just do that.
All right, Mr. Mao, thank you so much for raising those points. But let me ask you one final question. Could you tell me a little bit about what the Chinese public and policymakers see when they see India's economic growth story and what it's done over the last decade and a half? Is India seen as a rival or a competitor by China? Please give us your totally honest take. Because China has, of course, achieved a lot of success. India seems to also be growing quickly. What is China thinking really about India? Be honest with us.
I'm going to be completely honest about that. I mean, if you look at China's economic rise has been really splendid. So, China and India has, the two economies had the same level of GDP per capita in the beginning of 1990. You know that. Now China is almost like 5 times larger. Right? A little bit more than 5. It's almost like that. So, if there's no country like China in the world, India would be the brightest kid in the class. But unfortunately, there's China. If you put China into the picture, then India all of a sudden get overshadowed. That's something not related to the discrimination. No, it's not a prejudice. It's just happened like that. If you're from China, you look at it yourself, and you look at your neighbors in East Asia, like South Korea, like Japan, and those economies, you will find, okay, we've got used to like superb performance like that. It's normal for us.
Right.
But if you compare India to other South Asia country, like Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, you find that India doing very good. And if you compare that to Latin America, compared to Africa, compared to Middle East, India is doing actually very good. So Indian people coming to China feeling good about themselves, and they encountered Chinese people. They find Chinese people not get that impressed, so they find frustrated. Everybody say we are good, but you say we are not good. Are we good? Yes, you are good, but not as good as we are. That's the thing. I'm being completely honest about that.
No, that's all we want. That's all we want. Yeah, keep going.
I mean, it's really hard to get honest. Sometimes because you want to have a good relationship or good friendship with Indian people, so you don't actually tell them what's going on. So normally, if you go to Indian people, if it's very diplomatic scenario, they will say, okay, yeah, the twin rise of China to India. That's at the face value, it's face deep. They don't believe in that actually. They just tell you, okay, you are rising, I'm rising, we're rising together, but that's not true. If we are rising together, how come we are five times as big as you are, right? It's just not true. And the Chinese people, they are very diplomatic. They don't tell you the truth. And they want you to save the face. They know that if I say it out loud in front of you, oh, we are 5 times as large as you are, that's impolite. But if you do that all the time, people will get tired. Because you don't treat me as equal, but you are saying we are equal. So I just changed the strategy. I say I will be completely honest. Bigger is bigger, right? Then we can keep the frankness and friendship, but I'm going to be very frank and going to be very honest.
Understood.
I say whatever I mean, right?
Understood.
Mr. Mao, I want to thank you for your time and also for being extremely honest with us about how China is looking at India and India's economic growth story, saying there that in fact China does not view India as an equal, a rival, or a threat, but an interesting point of view that India will also have to take into account as it calibrates its policy towards China. But thank you again, Mr. Mao, for coming on the channel, for bringing a Chinese perspective to our Indian viewers. And thank you again to our viewers for joining us here on India Today Global.